I'm Corbett Wall with DVAuction, here with your feeder flash for Monday, August the 28th, brought to you in part by Macrocin by Bimeda, a bold, straight-shooting telithromycin injection that does what it's supposed to do for you, for your cattle, and for your bottom line. For more information, go to macrocin.com. Also, Joplin Regional Stockyards, uncharacteristically light offering for them. It was just really hot last week, and guys didn't get cattle around. Not moving a lot of cattle right now at all here late in the summer. Only 3,500 head expected for Joplin, and they're not going to start the sale until 8 o'clock. That would be like 3 o'clock in the afternoon for most sale barns because they like to get started early. But it's going to be a light run for them. You might be thinking about how light these offerings have been this month when the cattle on feed report time comes here the next time, but just not many cattle moving. Of course, extreme heat this past week has backed off receipts quite a bit. I would say a lot of sale barns, especially going up into the northern plains now, probably are backed up a little bit, and they will start bringing more receipts on now that that heat dome has kind of moved off. It's still hot, but it's not the hottest it's ever been. So, you know, the mid-90s feels pretty good whenever you were in a 105, 110, or heat index up in the Midwest over 120. But the hot week cools the market last week, and we saw it pretty much on all classes of cattle except for light calves, good ones where they were offered, and they're staying strong. And I still think these calf prices have got some legs in under them, and they're going to go quite a bit as we move here into the early fall. But you packers continue to play hardball. I mean, they've squeezed down this harvest. I mean, they've just shut it nearly off, really backed off here in the last month or 2 months really, but here the last 3 weeks it's been extremely light. I guess you can pick up some imports if they need the product, but they've got to have muscle cuts and things like that to sell here, and they've got promises made, they've got orders they've got to fill, but man, they've been disciplined, and that's what the packers are good at, is being disciplined. They've just about squeezed the faucet off on the harvest there. They're not buying very many negotiated cattle at all, doing everything they can figure out according to the Packers playbook to not raise the prices on the negotiated cattle that they buy. Of course, that keeps the prices down on all the formula sales that they purchase, which makes up the lion's share of what they buy. But box beef cutout values are finally taking off. We saw them dip down to the bottom and establish a floor here a few weeks ago, and that's seasonally. It happens that way every year. Usually they come right on. Now they didn't. They hung around there kind of at the bottom, but starting to come back. They held with choice cuts right around $3 there for a few weeks. Now it's taken off. The weighted average on last week's sales on all of your choice cutout sales was $3.17, so definitely a lot better than what we've seen. But I wouldn't expect the packers to get any easier to trade with, but they may want to ramp kills up a little bit, and I would expect them to want to do that. To do that, they might have to step up their bids on a negotiated basis, but like I said, they just don't sell hardly enough cattle negotiated, especially in the southern plains, to amount to anything anymore. But it still establishes the base price for all the cattle that they buy on a formula basis. So that's the same thing that I've been harping on for the last several years here, and it just keeps getting worse and worse all the time. It's very, very little price discovery in the fat cattle market. It's a little better in the northern plains, but they were able to whittle them down a little bit here this past week. But you know, supplies of market-ready cattle, you know, they may have stepped up just a little bit because your packers have backed off on the slaughter, and because they haven't been buying as many cattle in a negotiated manner. So they have a negotiated show list from the feedlots that typically sell negotiated. So it doesn't take much for those to back up a little bit when they haven't been buying any on the open cash market. But we have seen the show lists or the supplies of market ready cattle increase just a little bit here of late. May last here a few more weeks, but then it's going to get extremely tighter again. And don't forget, we've also got tighter supplies of market ready fed cattle, or cattle that are going to be finished here, because we have had heat death loss. As the heat stress has been terrible on the cattle. This last week it was terrible in eastern Nebraska, even over there in western Iowa and places. Just terrible, worse than in the southern plains. Southern plains has had winds blowing. It's been extremely hot, but no humidity hardly at all, and the winds have been blowing, so it hasn't been too much death loss or more than usual. But there really has been in the northern plains. Last week was terrible, and everyone that dies, and there were several feedlots that I heard up there that had hundreds, not just tens, but hundreds of cattle perish in the heat. And I don't know if we'll ever get any total counts on that. People really don't want to talk about it. It raises interest from the wrong kinds of people when you start talking about it, because they have absolutely no idea what they're talking about, and how change of weather like that can really be terrible for cattle that are in a lot. But also, don't forget, we lost considerable cattle in the floodwaters back early, in the summer there, down the southern plains. So depending on where those cattle are at, they might be ready. We haven't been doing anything to increase the numbers of cattle. The last few weeks have taken weight loss off the cattle significantly, so that's backed them up a little bit. Not going to be as many cattle for market ready supply. But this is the packers' problem as much as it is the feedlots' problem, or possibly more. But the few guys that sell negotiated cash cattle just can't seem to find any leverage, or don't use it whenever they do have it. But it's getting pretty tough out there. The heat last week, I heard through Kansas into Nebraska and Iowa, places in Missouri, really tough on guys that on producers that were fall calving. I've heard of a lot of calves that were sloughed, or heavy bred cows that just passed dead calves there in the extreme heat, and then that's a tough thing to take whenever you're waiting on a whole year there for a calf, and then has a dead calf, and then you got to start all over from scratch and wonder whether or not you want to keep that cow or not. We've also heard of some guys getting in some wrecks, trying to straighten up some of these light cattle, these unweaned light cattle that have been moving. Some guys are starting to get them put together because they're afraid the price is going to get higher, and I agree. I think it's going to get higher. They don't like the wide temperature swings. We haven't been seeing big wide temperature swings. Its temperatures have just been staying up there so high, even in the evenings. And it's hard to straighten light cattle out whenever it's hot like that. But just been a miserable last couple of weeks from the extreme heat. But starting to see some more moderate, some more average type temperatures come in, and we're glad to see that. I want to share with you a quick story that I think originally come out of Livestock Weekly. It was shared to me through social media, but it's about Miss Joni Foster, a 16-year-old student at Capitan, New Mexico, and that's in Lincoln County. Yes, the same Lincoln County that they had the Lincoln County Wars on and all that, but near Ruidoso down there. But she had 8 pigs that she took to the Lincoln County Fair, and did well with all of them. But they have a limit, which most of them do. A lot of them you can only sell 1. But at the Lincoln County Fair, you could sell 2 of your projects. So she picked her 2 pigs that she wanted to sell in the premium sale at the Lincoln County Fair. She also had another project that she had made, an ag mechanics type project, but she decided to sell those 2 pigs, and she announced at the premium sale that instead of keeping that money, she was going to have the total money that was put together, all the auction proceeds for those 2 hogs. She was going to put that and have it averaged out and shared equally among all the exhibitors, even the exhibitors that didn't have livestock. Some of them might have just had vegetables or whatever, maybe art or something like that. But there was only about 100 there. It's a small county there as far as head counts. But she was going to share the proceeds of her sale equally among all the exhibitors. When they started selling those hogs, they noticed that they could put if they had 2 bidders, they could put their money together, what they was willing to do, willing to pay, and put that, and then they just had more people adding on. And at that small county fair, they raised or sold those hogs for $45,000, and then split equally among those students, about $450 each. And a lot of them, never had money like that. Some of them that weren't showing livestock and things, but they were very excited about it. It just goes to show you the ag communities. We talk about it in the sale barns, but it's also with these 4-H and FFA programs and these stock shows and county fairs and things like that. If that doesn't make you feel good about being in the agriculture community, well, nothing will. Let's talk about your board for last week. August live cattle futures, Monday was up 45, Tuesday down 102, Wednesday up 10 cents, Thursday up $1.80, Friday up 82. Strong gains late in the week there with your August live cattle futures ending the week at 180.67, up $2.15 for the week. October ended the week at 181.17, up $2.35 for the week. August feeder cattle, Monday was up $1.20, Tuesday down 127, Wednesday down 47 with the grains higher, but Thursday was up $1.47 and Friday up $1.12 with August feeder cattle ending the week at 247.62. That was up 205 for the week. September feeder contracts up 268 for the week at 251.20. So some nice gains late in the week. Your grains, December new crop corn, 488 at the end of the week. That was down 5 cents for the week. November new crop beans ended the week at 1387 3/4. That was up 34.5. That extreme heat is kind of drying down the corn, which the corn's pretty much made. Beans are not made yet, and of course there wasn't much moisture come along with that heat really drying those beans out. Kansas City hard red winter wheat for September ended the week at 754, and that was up just a ½ cent a bushel for the week. Fat cattle trade up through Thursday of last week only totaled 29,400 head. Negotiated sales in your 5-area feeding region, that is minuscule, hardly anything at all. They didn't trade any cattle in the southern plains until Friday, so we really didn't know what the market was until Friday, and they ended up selling those cattle steady with the previous week at 179. Actually, your sellers didn't get as much money if they were hedged up, which they all are, because your August live cattle contract was up $2, so that ended up costing them $2 when they trade the paper out for that. So they didn't have a basis. They were negative basis there. But in the northern plains, they sold the cattle on a weaker type market there. We didn't see a whole lot of movement there either, but it was kind of $1 to $2 lower. But your fat steers and heifers last week negotiated in the 5-area range from 183 to 188. Of course, that 183, that did not include the 179 Friday because it was just up through Thursday. But your weighted average up through Thursday was just a few pennies higher, but without any cattle in there from the southern plains, it's going to be lower. It's going to be quite a few cents, maybe $1 lower than it was the previous week. Dress sales 290 to 295, steady to $2 lower. Weighted average on dress steers was 290, 265. down 147 compared to the end of the previous week. But on Friday, they sold a few more cattle, 3,700 head in Iowa, 14,500 is all for the week. Live sales in Iowa on Friday, 182 to 187. Dress sales from 292 to 295. Nebraska, 2,000 head on Friday, 20,500 for the week. Only cattle that had live price on Friday were at 184 and 295. Kansas sold 7,800 head on Friday. They had only sold about 200 more than that for the whole week. So everything on Friday, and I assume there's going to be some more that was after the 2 o'clock deadline, so we'll get those on our next visit. So be anxious to see how many cattle they did sell last week, all totaled, even including the Friday evening sales or late afternoon sales. But Kansas was all 179, Texas 7,300 head, all on Friday, and that's all they'd sold for the week. 178 to largely 179, mostly all 179 there. I will add that the Fed Cattle Exchange on Thursday had a pretty attractive set of commodity cattle in Kansas, and they did receive bids on Thursday before we had the Southern Plains trade up to 180 and a quarter, but then they only sold the cattle at 179 in the country. The bad thing is the seller had those cattle with a reserve price of 182, and we talked this past week about how if you're going to put them up for bids, you know, it's kind of a good deal to put them in there and let them go with about steady money from the previous week or somewhere that's more reasonable, because once they start bidding and know that they're going to get them, they get a little bit more aggressive there. And it's just like whenever you're selling a horse or you're selling a piece of property, when you get them up so high and you say, okay, we're going to have a new owner, so they're not going to PO what we're selling and have a new owner. A lot of times an auction sale will get a little more leg under it like that. But you can consign cattle to the Fed Cattle Exchange for $3 a head, guys, and you can be part of the solution and not part of the problem, because it just seems like nobody has any leverage to try to sell cattle private treaty negotiated anymore. But or you could consign them to Consolidated Beef Producers here in Canyon, Texas. Become a member of Consolidated Beef Producers. It only costs you $2 a head for them to sell them, and strength is in numbers. More numbers they can get, the better market they can get for you. Box beef cutout values, I talked about them earlier. They were quite a bit higher for last week. Your weighted average on all of last week's choice cuts, 317.04. That was up 663. Your late Friday sales were almost $1 higher than that. Your weighted average price on all of last week's select, 290.60, up 603. And your late Friday sales were about $2 higher than that. But $26.44 price spread, or spread between choice and select there on your weighted average, and only 451 loads of cuts, grinds, and trimmings, as they were trying to get the price higher. Of course, they're not going to move near as much product, but if they can keep those cuts up there, those cut values up there, and start moving product, then maybe they'll get a little more aggressive on the slaughter. But slaughter last week was only 626,000, but it was still 10,000 better than the previous week. 52,000 head less than the same week a year ago. Talk about what else is going on. EverAg Risk Management. They specialize in cattle and grain brokerage, insurance services, advisory services to buyers and sellers of grain products, and vault software technology. So manage your risk with Ever.ag. Talk about your feeder cattle market, your real-time index on DVAuction based on an 800-pound cash auction steer. Ended the week at 244.35. That was down $1.20 compared to the end of the previous week, and mostly all just due to the heat and the problems with the heat, problems moving the cattle, feedlots not wanting new cattle, trying to give cattle some room, do anything to cool them off. But Mother Nature, you know, in a cash market, you have to deal with that. Not so much on your futures, and your futures were higher late in the week when everybody else was completely heat exhausted. But that's what happens to your cash markets. But feeders last week, cash feeders in your sale barn sold steady to $4 lower on a very light test. A lot of our high volume sales did not have enough cattle to really test the market. Calves, good calves, especially weaned calves that were offered, were steady in a light test. Give you some quotes from some big sales around late last week and over the weekend. How about Fort Scott Livestock Market in Fort Scott, Kansas? DVAuction broadcaster there on Saturday. They sold in one lot 297 head of 1,000-pound steers at $233 1/4. Wow, that was a good price right there. I heard from Nick Hayes at Winter Livestock Auction, not Winter, but Winter, South Dakota. Winter Livestock Auction. They had their barbecue special on Friday. Had an awfully good run there. Some unbelievable prices included in there. And these are individual lots, but big lots there. Strings of cattle. 209 head of black steers, weight 886 at $261.75. 120 head of bigger black steers, weight 941 and bring $255.10. On some heifers, they had 191 head of pregged open Charolais heifers, 878 on the pounds and $243.50. But if they're spayed, this is a good way to check how much premium you get for spayed heifers. They had 140 heifers. They were black and spayed, weighed almost exactly the same as those Charolais, weighed 877 and bring $247.50. So there's a $4 premium, and you can call it on the spayed or on the blacks. I'm sure it may have been a little bit of both, but there's a good premium on spayed heifers, and you also get some extra weight gain out of them while you own them. But talk about another sale, individual quote. How about Crawford Livestock Market in Crawford, Nebraska? Robertson's there, good friends of mine. 68 steers, weight 764 at $269. John Shaven gave me a heads up at Dunlap Livestock Auction on Friday. He had some mixed commodity heifers, colored up heifers. You don't get that very often in Dunlap, and I think that's one reason he gave me a heads up on this individual quote. But 79 mixed colored commodity heifers there. They had been backgrounded but hadn't been pushed very hard. They had kind of a light flesh on them. 79 of them weighed 713 and bring $255. My goodness. But the most impressive quote that I saw anywhere late last week or over the weekend, and your Mackerson, no BS, top quote for the day, indeed come out of Winter Livestock Auctions barbecue special. It was 238 head of black steers, weighed 928 at $257 1/4. And that's your feeder flash for Monday.